They were convinced you would crack. They were convinced you would text. They were convinced you would plead. And when you did not, that silence struck harder than any argument ever could. Because the moment you refused to beg, the balance of power began to shift. Not in a loud or dramatic way, but in a quiet manner that endured. Let us look at what truly happens when a narcissistic person waits for you to come crawling back, and you simply do not. If this resonates with you, if you have ever chosen dignity over desperation, stay with this, because what follows can change how you understand silence entirely. The narcissist anticipates emotional collapse when they pull away. And this expectation is not random. It is patterned, practiced, and rooted in how control has worked for them before. When they withdraw, whether through silent treatment, sudden coldness, or vague distance, they are not merely needing space. They are setting a stage within their own internal script. Your role is already written. You are supposed to feel anxious. You are supposed to panic. You are supposed to reach out repeatedly, apologize for things you never did, and try to repair something they deliberately disrupted. Withdrawal for them is leverage. It is a tool designed to trigger your attachment system. They understand, often instinctively, that inconsistency creates obsession, so they remove warmth and closeness. They rely on your discomfort to pull you toward them. And when you chase, it confirms how important they are. It reassures them that they still hold the emotional center in your world. This is why your breakdown matters so much to them. Your distress equals proof. Proof that they are powerful. Proof that they are desired. Proof that they can shake your nervous system whenever they choose. Without that reaction, their strategy begins to fall apart. The silence becomes simply silence. The distance becomes real. And suddenly the control they believe they had starts to feel unstable. For someone with narcissistic tendencies, emotional reactions are like currency. They are not seeking connection as much as they are seeking regulation through dominance. Your begging calms their insecurity. Your tears make them feel significant. Your desperate messages reinforce their illusion of superiority. So when they pull back, they are not simply leaving. They are testing. They are waiting for the moment when your anxiety becomes strong enough to override your self-respect. They assume collapse is inevitable because it has likely happened before. That belief is what makes your steadiness so disruptive. When the expected breakdown never occurs, the narrative they rely on begins to fracture from within. Your silence disrupts their control story in a way that arguing never could. When you argue, defend, explain, or even push back, you are still participating in the emotional exchange. You are still demonstrating that the connection deeply matters to you. Even conflict keeps you involved, but silence, calm, and intentional silence removes you from the script entirely. A narcissistic dynamic depends on predictability. They believe they know how you will react because they have learned your emotional patterns. They know which tone unsettles you, which accusation triggers you, which distance makes you anxious. Over time, they build a private narrative. If I do this, they will respond like that. This narrative supports their sense of control. It makes the relationship feel manageable because your behavior appears predictable. When you stop reacting the way you once did, that narrative collapses. Your silence introduces uncertainty, and uncertainty is deeply unsettling for someone who depends on emotional predictability. They begin asking questions they do not want to face. Are you letting go? Are you moving forward? Do you no longer care? The absence of reaction forces them to confront the possibility that they misjudged how important they were to you. Control narratives require feedback. They need visible proof that their actions have an effect. When you do not provide that proof, they cannot measure their impact. They may escalate, sending indirect messages, testing with casual check-ins, or attempting to provoke jealousy. These actions are not random. They are attempts to restore predictability. They want to see if the old triggers still work. Your silence, however, communicates something far stronger than anger ever could. It reflects emotional steadiness. It suggests that you are no longer acting from impulse, but from choice. And choice is threatening to someone who depended on your reactions. In that quiet space, without arguing or explaining, the balance gradually shifts because the story they told themselves about controlling you no longer fits. Your lack of reaction cuts off their supply, and that is more significant than most people realize. In these dynamics, emotional supply is not limited to admiration or praise. It is any strong emotional response that proves impact. Anger, tears, pleading, long explanations, even outrage all serve the same function. It reassures them that they matter enough to affect you. When you react intensely, you become a mirror reflecting their importance. Your distress tells them they are central. Your efforts to fix things signal that they are valuable. Even your frustration shows that they occupy your thoughts. For someone who depends on external validation to stabilize fragile self-worth, that reaction is soothing. It quiets their internal doubt. But when you stop reacting, something shifts within them. Without your emotional output, there is no feedback loop. They provoke and nothing returns. They withdraw and no one follows. They attempt to stir jealousy, and there is no visible response. The absence of reaction feels like emptiness, and emptiness is deeply uncomfortable for someone who relies on external emotional energy. This is why your silence is often misinterpreted as coldness or cruelty. It is not that you are being harsh. It is that you are no longer regulating their insecurity with your emotional responses. You are no longer easing their self-doubt with your anxiety. That loss of supply can feel unsettling because it exposes how much they depended on your reactions to feel powerful or important. Not reacting does not mean you feel nothing. It means you are holding your feelings within instead of offering them to someone who once used them against you. Holding that inside shifts power. It signals that your emotional state is no longer accessible to them on demand. Without supply, they are left alone with their own discomfort, something they rarely intend to face. They perceive independence as defiance rather than growth. When you begin to stand emotionally on your own, when you stop chasing, stop over-explaining, stop trying to fix what they disrupted, it does not appear as growth to them. It appears as resistance. In their perspective, independence feels like opposition. In these dynamics, there is often an unspoken hierarchy. One person assumes the role of emotional authority, while the other is expected to remain aligned with that authority. Your needs, your timing, your reactions are quietly shaped around their moods and choices. Over time, this becomes normalized. So when you begin to pull away in a healthy manner, when you no longer seek permission to feel what you feel, it disrupts that structure. Instead of recognizing your independence as strength, they may label it as disrespect. They might say you have changed, that you are distant, that you are acting differently. But what they often mean is that you are no longer following the previous emotional agreement. And that agreement is what made them feel secure. Independence challenges their sense of entitlement. If they believe they are entitled to your quick replies, your constant presence, or your emotional labor, then your calm distance feels like a violation of that entitlement. They may intensify their efforts, blame you, or attempt to draw you back into old patterns. Not because they desire conflict for its own sake, but because conflict at least ensures your engagement. Your independence forces them to confront a reality they resist. You are your own person with your own will. You are not an extension of their ego. You are not a supporting character in their narrative. And that realization can feel threatening because it means they no longer control the emotional rhythm. When you remain steady without anger, without drama, simply grounded in your self-respect, it highlights how much the previous dynamic depended on your compliance. What they interpret as defiance is often just you reclaiming ownership of your emotional life. Begging. in contrast, reinforces their sense of superiority. And that validation is the hidden reward they anticipate. When someone pleads for attention, for reconciliation, for another opportunity, it does more than reopen the connection. It establishes a hierarchy. The one who begs lowers themselves, while the one being begged is elevated, at least in their perception. In these dynamics, superiority is not merely a preference, it is a stabilizing force. It protects a fragile internal sense that depends on feeling exceptional, irreplaceable, or in control. When you beg, you reinforce that structure. Your desperation becomes evidence that they are the one to be desired. Your willingness to overlook mistreatment becomes proof that they hold greater value. Your emotional urgency strengthens their belief that they are central, that they are above, that they are the one with power. And when that validation is withheld, when you choose silence instead, the entire structure they relied on begins to weaken in ways they cannot easily repair. Even your apologies for things that were never your fault quietly reinforce their higher position. This is why waiting for you to beg can start to feel almost ritualistic. It is not only about reconnecting or getting back together, it is about restoring the order they believe should exist. If you return feeling small, emotional, and pleading, the imbalance is reestablished. They regain their higher ground. The story becomes that you cannot manage without them. Begging also removes the need for accountability. When you chase and apologize, the focus shifts away from what they actually did. The narrative slowly rewrites itself so that your reaction becomes the issue, not their withdrawal, harshness, or inconsistency. In that moment, they do not have to reflect on their behavior. They do not have to repair anything. Your pursuit erases their responsibility in a subtle but powerful way. So when you refuse to beg, it does more than protect your dignity. It interrupts the superiority loop. It denies them that symbolic moment of elevation. Without your pleading, they cannot easily claim dominance. They cannot use your emotional collapse as evidence of their importance. Choosing not to beg is not about pride. It is about refusing to participate in a connection built on imbalance. And when that validation never arrives, the sense of superiority they expected begins to weaken. Emotional regulation becomes your greatest shift in power because it transforms the entire nature of the interaction. In these dynamics, control is often achieved by stirring emotions. If they can trigger you, make you anxious, upset, confused, or desperate, then they can anticipate your moves. And if they can anticipate you, they can guide the outcome. Your emotional highs and lows become their instrument. When you regulate instead of react, you disrupt that mechanism. Regulation does not mean suppressing your feelings. It does not mean you are unaffected. It means you notice the surge of anxiety when they pull away, the urge to text when they go silent, the impulse to defend yourself when they provoke, and you pause. That pause changes everything. In that brief moment, you choose rather than unravel. For someone accustomed to controlling dynamics through emotional turbulence, your steadiness feels unfamiliar. They may intensify their behavior, becoming colder, more dramatic, more provoking, because in the past, intensity produced results. But steadiness absorbs intensity. It does not amplify it. Gradually, their methods begin to lose effectiveness. Emotional regulation also reshapes the story you tell yourself. Instead of asking, "How do I get them back?" you begin asking, "Why does this behavior feel unacceptable to me?" The focus shifts from preserving the connection at any cost to preserving your own inner balance. That internal shift is profound because it reconnects you to yourself. When your emotional state is no longer easily influenced, their sense of control weakens. They cannot manufacture urgency within you. They cannot rely on panic to pull you closer. You become less reactive, more observant, and awareness brings clarity. Clarity, in turn, lowers your tolerance for manipulation. You begin to see patterns instead of isolated incidents. You recognize tactics instead of personal flaws. Emotional regulation does not make you distant, it makes you grounded. And someone who is grounded is far more difficult to shake. Within that grounded state, the relationship begins to rebalance because power no longer belongs to whoever creates the most emotional chaos. Their waiting becomes a test of dominance. Even if it appears passive on the surface, when they withdraw and go quiet, it can look like indifference or stubbornness. But often it is a deliberate stillness. They are not stepping away emotionally. They are observing. They are measuring how long it takes for you to break the silence. That waiting period is filled with expectation. In their mind, there is a clock running. The longer you remain silent, the more pressure builds. They anticipate the moment you will give in. When discomfort becomes overwhelming, and you reach out, call, or try to fix things, that moment is not just contact, it is confirmation. It proves they can create distance and you will close it. It proves they can unsettle you, and you will attempt to reconnect. Dominance here is quiet rather than loud. It is about who moves first, who apologizes first, who can tolerate uncertainty longer. If you are always the one to close the gap, the unspoken rule becomes obvious. They step back, you step forward. Step. That pattern secures control without ever needing to be spoken. When you choose not to reach out, their test becomes uncomfortable. The silence they initiated now surrounds them as well. Instead of feeling powerful, they may begin to feel exposed. The dominance they relied on starts to feel unstable. They might check your social media, look for indirect signals, or send something small just to see if the connection still exists. These are attempts to regain control. Your refusal to engage shifts the outcome. You are no longer proving loyalty through pursuit. You are no longer showing fear of loss through urgency. The waiting ceases to be their power move and becomes a shared silence. And within that shared silence, dominance loses its structure because control depends on one person always reacting while the other remains still. Your dignity becomes a mirror for them, and that mirror can be difficult to face. When you refuse to beg, refuse to chase, refuse to panic, you are not attacking them. You are simply standing firmly in your self-respect. But that steadiness reflects something back to them that they may not be ready to acknowledge. In these dynamics, projection is common. They externalize their insecurity, blame others for instability, and often reshape events to protect their self-image. When you react emotionally, it supports that distortion. They can label you as overly sensitive, dramatic, or needy. Your visible distress becomes evidence for their version of events. But when you respond with composure, that narrative weakens. If you remain calm, steady, and self-contained, it becomes harder to portray you as unreasonable. Your composure exposes the imbalance without requiring explanation. It quietly reveals who is creating instability and who is maintaining steadiness. Dignity also reflects independence. It shows that your sense of self remains intact even in their absence. You are not scrambling for validation. You are not settling for fragments of attention. That reflection can be unsettling because it challenges the belief that they are essential. If you remain steady without them, then perhaps they were not as central to your well-being as they assumed. This mirror effect can trigger different responses. Some may attempt to break it by provoking, criticizing, or pulling you back into emotional chaos. Others may withdraw further because the reflection feels too uncomfortable to face. Either way, your dignity creates a moment of internal confrontation. You are not trying to shame them or compete with them. You are simply embodying self-respect. And when someone who expected desperation instead encounters composure, they are left facing a gap between your stability and their need for control. That gap communicates more than any argument ever could. In the end, this was never truly about silence, ego, or who made the first move. It was about power, and more importantly, where that power actually resides. The narcissist waited for you to beg, because begging would have restored the familiar order. It would have confirmed control, superiority, and emotional dominance. Your collapse would have reassured them that nothing had changed. But you changed. You did not respond impulsively. You did not chase to soothe your anxiety. You did not sacrifice your dignity to ease discomfort. And by doing so, you transformed the entire dynamic without a single dramatic confrontation. The control narrative weakened. The emotional supply diminished. The dominance test failed. The superiority they expected never fully formed. What makes this shift so powerful is that it begins internally before it appears externally. You regulated. You paused. You chose self-respect over desperation. That decision dismantled a system that relied on your reactions. When you stopped proving your attachment through panic, you stopped reinforcing the idea that they were irreplaceable. And the deeper truth is this: real power was never about who could remain silent longer. It was about who could remain emotionally steady. Power lived in the nervous system that refused to be overtaken. Power existed in silence that was not used as a weapon, but came from a place of strength. Power was rooted in dignity. When they waited for you to beg, and you never did, it was not about defeating them. It was about returning to yourself. You did not win by overpowering them. You shifted by outgrowing the entire dynamic.